Hi guys! Today we're going to be talking about secondary dominants. So a secondary dominant is a common type of chord substitution, and it uses tension to make the chord resolve to a target chord within the key that you're in. It's also called a secondary tonic. Now let's look at some examples of secondary dominants. So the secondary dominant in that chord progression was the A dominant 7. And this is because it wasn't diatonic to C major, which is the key. It was borrowed from another key. But its tension, especially between C sharp and G, which is the tritone in the A7 chord, it made it possible to momentarily resolve to D minor. And that momentary resolution is called tonicization. So the momentary resolution was, and D minor is diatonic to the key of C major because it doesn't have any flats or sharps in the chord. And after that, it does a 2-5-1 cadence back to C. So D minor is the 2 chord of C major. The G dominant chord is the primary dominant chord of C major, or the 5 chord, and then it resolves at the home key, which is C major. So let me play the example for you one more time. And the secondary dominant made it much more interesting than just a plain chord progression with all diatonic chords like this. Okay, let me play another example in C major, and this time you try to find the secondary dominant. So the secondary dominant is the B7 chord because it has sharps in it and C major doesn't have any sharps or flats. So that's one way that you could tell that that was a secondary dominant. So you can also tell that B7 is a secondary dominant because in the chord progression after the C major chord, the B7 chord resolves to a diatonic chord, which is the E minor chord. And after that, it just uses diatonic chords to get back to C. So as you can see from those examples, the secondary dominant was a non-diatonic chord, but it resolved to a diatonic chord within the key, and then after that diatonic chord, you had a bunch of other chords leading to the home key. Now let's talk about secondary dominants in a theoretical perspective. So in any key, you have the secondary dominants as the 5 of 2, 5 of 3, 5 of 4, 5 of 5, and 5 of 6. So let's go into detail with that. So let's start with the 5 of 2 in the key of D major. So you're in the key of D major. And you have to find the second chord of this key. So D major would be the first chord, or the 1 chord. And E minor would be the 2 chord. So now you have to find the 5 of 2. So we already found the 2 of D major, which is E minor. And now, assuming we're in the key of E minor, we have to find the dominant 5 chord, or the primary dominant of that key. So in the key of E minor, the primary dominant, or the 5th note, is B. So you would have a B7, which would be that. Or you could invert it any way you like. Okay, so now that we know the 5 of 2, let's move on to the 5 of 3. So you have your key of D major, and you need to find the 3rd chord. So 1, 2, 3. So the 3rd chord of D major is the F sharp minor chord. So assuming you've moved completely into this key, you need to find the 5 chord, which is the primary dominant. So that would be a C sharp 7. So that would be this, and you can invert it however you like. Now let's move on to the 5 of 4. So in D major, your 4th chord is a G major chord, and in the key of G major, the 5 chord is the D7. So D7 would be your 5 of 4. For your 5 of 5, you first take the 5th chord of the D major scale, which is A major, and now you have to find the 5-7 chord of A major, so the 5th chord would be the E7 chord. So lastly, let's take the 5 of 6. So the 6th chord of the D major key would be B minor, and to find the dominant chord of the B minor key, you just take the 5th note and construct a dominant chord on top of that. So you would have an F sharp 7. You can do this for any key. I just chose D major as an example. Now that we know what the 5 of 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are in D major, we can form some chord progressions. So let's try to construct a progression with the secondary dominant as the 5 of 2. So we already know that the 5 of 2 in D major is the B7. To construct just a simple chord progression with this secondary dominant, you would do the 5 of 2 to the 2. So this is your 5 of 2, which is the B7. And you want to go back to the 2, so the 2nd chord of the D major key, which is E minor. So your chord progression would be B7 to E minor. But in order to show that it's in D major and make it a bit more interesting, let's first start with the D major chord. Then we can do that simple chord progression and then find a way to resolve back to D. So your full chord progression with the secondary dominant as the 5 of 2 could sound like this. So as you can see, I started with a D major chord, then I did the simple chord progression from the 5 of 2 to the 2, and then from there, the E minor, A7, and D major chord are part of a 2-5-1 cadence. That's what helped me resolve back to D major after the secondary dominant. So let me play that 2-5-1 for you. So that helped me resolve from E minor to D major. Now let's do the 5 of 3 progression. So we know that the 5 of 3 in D major is the C sharp 7. So we can form a simple chord progression from the 5 of 3 to the 3, which would be from the C sharp 7 to F sharp minor. And now let's make it part of a D major progression. So we'll start with D major, then we'll play the secondary dominant part, the simple progression, and then we'll resolve back to D. So after the F sharp minor chord, I just went to the A7 and resolved to D. There's another way that you could form the progression though, and it's a little bit more complex. That was more complex because it had a series of back-cycling dominants in it. So after the D chord, the C sharp 7 chord leading to the F sharp minor 7 chord, I did B7, E7, A7, and back to D. So those are the dominants, B dominant, E dominant, A dominant. So let me play those back cycling dominants again. It's called back cycling dominants because you have a series of dominant chords without any minor or major chords in between. Okay, now let's go to the 5 of 4 progression. So the 5 of 4 is the D7. So our simple progression would be from D7 to D, which is the 4 of D major. And now to make it a D major progression, we could make it sound like this. So at the end, after that simple progression, I just have a 5-to-1 motion from A7 to D. Okay, we'll do 5 of 5 now. So our 5 of 5 in D major is the E7. So our simple progression would be from E7 to A. So that would be... And now let's make it a D major progression. So we would start at D, then we would play the simple progression, and now we need to resolve to D. So the most common way to resolve to D is playing the A7 to the D, and we can see that we already have an A major chord here. But we could just make this an A7 chord instead of playing the A major chord and then the A dominant chord. Instead of it being we can just take out that A major chord so it would sound like this. And this creates some back cycling dominants just from the E7 to the A7. Lastly, we have the 5 of 6, and in D major that would be the F sharp dominant. So we start at D, and our simple progression is the 5 of 6 to the 6 of D major. So that would be... And then we have to resolve to D. So we could do a progression like this. So I went from the D to the F sharp 7 to B minor, and then I went to E7 and then A. So that part of the progression right there, the B minor to the E7 to the A, let me play it again for you. That was a 2-5-1 cadence in A major. And then after that A major chord, I just did a 5-to-1 motion in D major, which was the A7 to the D that we saw before. Now you know how to identify and create secondary dominants. Thanks for watching. Please like my video and subscribe to my channel, Tara Talks Music.